So for those live and watching the recording, thanks for taking the time to consume some of this content. So this is really a session just for asking any questions around AI and using this space to kind of delve into topics that are top of mind for a lot of people and difficulty finding, a critical path that makes it easy to execute on AI initiatives, whatever that may look like, whether it's something on the micro level all the way up to organizational strategic goals. And so the format today, really straightforward. It's just a quick little roundtable. So you guys already know me, and I'll give you guys space to introduce yourselves if you'd like. And then what I'd love to hear from both of you is what you are loving the most with AI right now. What are you struggling with the most? And then what is your main intention for this? What questions are you percolating on right now? So I'll hand the floor over to Anna Jeannie. You want to start?
Yeah. So I'm Anna Jeannie, and I work as a data AI analyst for a PR company. The struggle, I would say, well, particularly for the work that I do, would be currently the quality of the information you're getting. Like a question would be like, how would you do quality checks on the information you're getting when you're working with like big data sources for specific companies? So that is my main intention for this call today.
Okay, so my name is Jonathan Tobe. I'm the president of Rimrock Corporation. We're Dynamics, Microsoft independent software vendor with a field service product called Field Boss. That is field service for elevator and heating and cooling contractors. What I'm loving the most about AI right now, it's the fact that after like a long career, I feel like I've got a new lease on life. Everything's different and it's endlessly fascinating. So work is fun. I'm struggling with a lot with AI, a lot. I'm finding it hard to find the time to really learn it because it takes focus and dedicated time, and I'm quite busy with life and work as well, like everybody else. And then for, professionally, what I'm struggling with is we've got two mandates. We've got to agentify our operation and make our business more efficient. And then we've got a product that also has to be agentified and add value to our customers. So there's like we're fighting a war on two fronts. My main intention with this call was to watch the soccer game while you guys talked. I thought there'd be like a lot of people on here, and I maybe I'd eat lunch. But when I logged in, there's like three of us, and it's like, oh great, and I gotta pull my weight here. So my intention for the call, I don't want to be selfish about it. Like I think it's healthy for me to hear what and Jeannie, like her challenges are, because I'm going to learn from that as well, and hopefully she'll get the same perspective from me. But I guess my main intention is to get as much information out of Will as I can, without hogging the meeting or being like a selfish, business owner.
Oh, I think those are great topics, and that's kind of the whole intention for this session, is to just put everything out on the table and try and unlock some clarity for everybody. So I think there's a couple interesting themes in there. I want to talk a little bit about data quality first, since that's the one that Anna Jeannie brought up that I think is important. And then moving into another theme that we've been exploring too internally around how are you making hyper agile humans that are empowered by agentic infrastructure? Because I think that covers some of the points that you're talking about, Jonathan. So in regard to data quality, I guess the first question that I'd have, Anna Jeannie, is with those large data sets, how are citations generated when you're, pulling down information? Like, I don't know exactly what the scenario is, but I imagine, potentially what you have is, a 50 column table with millions of rows, and you're, trying to basically natural language query it to get some kind of information. And so when you're doing that, like what is the process for vetting the answer today?
So currently what we do is we have the amount of data sources. It has like the specific information where you pulled it from and all that good stuff. But when you're trying to like extract into like summaries or insights for your client, or just to like do like specific like analysis, it's not really like big ass analysis per se, but more just like specific like summary type analyses. Like sometimes you would ask it to pull like specific information, but how would you know in that case? Or like when you're doing research, like there's multiple times where it would make up a specific site instead, rather than having a legitimate site that the AI uses. So like just like those kind of processes.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of the challenge with that is there's a lot of, I think in my mind at least, distinguishment between when I'm doing an ad hoc request to an AI platform, whatever that is, versus something that I'm routinely going to do. And I think one thing I'd encourage is, if this is a routine, I'm doing this research more than once, I'd be figuring out how to build a system prompt of some kind, because that's really the backbone of a lot of AI technologies today, and at least in our own experience with developing agents, is the system prompt is really kind of the roles and responsibilities that you're outlining for your AI tool to explain, like, this is good, this is bad. And part of the reason why that's important is because, if you peel back a layer and look under the hood of a large language model, they're trained on what's called reward functions. And reward functions are kind of like, dogs. Like, they get a treat, they get a certain amount of, what they consider to be numerical value associated with a positive outcome. And the challenge that we have is when you're using Claude, when you're using OpenAI, whatever tool you're using, you didn't get to decide on that reward system, right? The vendor that created that model decided on the reward system. And so sometimes the reward mechanisms of that model are not tuned to your specific use case, which is part of what fine tuning exists for. But the main challenge with fine tuning is that usually it requires, thousands of samples, you got to run these big computing jobs, and sometimes it's really just not worth it. So one thing we found very effective is using that system prompt to kind of add these anti-patterns to basically explain to the model, hey, like, here's the things we want you to unlearn, so that when you're doing this, you're following our approach to things rather than just the generic form of doing research. So I don't know if that necessarily is, something that you can do in this particular scenario with this particular project. But I think that's, whether you're using Claude or ChatGPT or your own custom agent, like having kind of a pre-baked context of, this is what you're supposed to be doing, this is what you're going to get rewarded for, and this is what you're going to lose points for, that's going to help keep the agent kind of hyper-focused on achieving a particular outcome. Yep. Yeah, I can show you an example. So, for example, in my team, I run entrepreneurial operating system. So if I go into my EOS folder here, I have data, and I've got all of my time studies as markdown files. So these are basically aggregations of all the time that I spent over the last week. And so what I can do is, now if I went in, and this is part of why I actually love GitHub Copilot the most, that's kind of my favorite place right now, is I can drop in here and say, hey, pull the context of this file and do, X, Y, and Z, like calculate the monthly averages of my time spent on, miscellaneous tasks or admin tasks or something like that. Or if I wanted to do something a bit more basic, I could go into the weekly meeting minutes and say, hey, just give me a 5-second summary of this. And what I think is helpful when you're doing it in here is you can actually see, I don't think it shows it in here, actually. I think it's down. So if I just do a test command, do this. So you'll see down here after it stops running the request. Let me see if I canceled it. Let me try this one more time. What it does that I think is super helpful to see is it actually gives you kind of a circle that says, hey, this is how much of the context window you're currently occupying. And so you can see, like, oh, I'm running out of space in this conversation. And, it doesn't happen every single time, but it'll be like, oh, I don't have any more room to answer these requests in this particular conversation. And so what I'll do as a habit is, when I see that starting to happen, there's something called compaction, which some of these tools will do automatically, but you don't necessarily have control over how it does it. So sometimes what I'll do, so for example, if I conduct an L10 meeting, I'll say, okay, thanks for, all the conversation we just had, write like a summary version of that to this particular point in the memory file. And so that way I don't have to use that same chat, right? I can open up a new chat and just pull the summary of that working session from the markdown file. And then that way I kind of keep that particular context window clean.
The president of a company, the best use of my time is selling and recruiting people, quite frankly, or managing the staff. How the hell am I supposed to but then you said your default is GitHub Copilot to as a tool, let's say I'm a high performing executive that's doing a good job. Does that if you looked at what that looks like in the dictionary, does that mean I have to have competencies in GitHub Copilot and be able to do this stuff myself? It's a serious question.
Yeah,
Like if you
I
were in
understand what
my
you're saying.
shoes, like knowing what you know about life and AI and a little bit about our company, and you took my job over, like what, or you were hiring me to get my job for the first time, what would you recommend I be very strong with in terms of all the stuff you two just talked about? Like, what's
Yeah.
the sort of minimum competency level I should be striving toward?
So that's a really good question because I think that's where a lot of people get lost when they're trying to focus on. And I had a conversation with another MVP about this a little while ago, where especially in the Microsoft ecosystem, and frankly in every ecosystem, there's new stuff coming out at a more increasing rate than it's possible to consume. I don't even look at everything. Like I couldn't tell you what the newest feature is in Business Central around AI. I don't particularly care, and I'm not going to explore it. What I've learned kind of saved me the headache of, a couple years ago, I'd be spending 12 hours looking at the Microsoft build recordings to figure out every single technical thing that could be done. And what I instead started to focus on were the fundamentals that have not changed, right? Like writing really good prompts is not going to go away. Yes, you may offload some of that to agents to write you better prompts, but knowing how to give good instructions, right? Like delegation is a skill that's always going to be there. This idea of context is really just a new flavor of data management, right? Like if you scatter a bunch of data in one place, it's going to be messy and harder for things to process. So that's another, I guess, fundamental competency is just, having a habit around data stewardship is more or less what I would call that. I think the other main one is understanding what can be qualified as a system versus an ad hoc thing. If I'm going to ask an AI agent the same thing more than once, I'm already looking into how do I make this an SOP? How do I make it a protocol? What can I do to make this something that can run on its own so that I don't even have to think about it anymore? Because much like you, I can understand like having 1,000 things going on all the time, and that's just not physically possible for your brain to consistently manage effectively. And so what's worked for me, like we now have about, I think, 50 agents that run a lot of the main business functions. And that way I just know all I have to remember is what triggers this. All I have to remember is what triggers this. And part of the kind of value prop of those fundamentals is if you have good data stewardship, that means this approach is always going to remain somewhat clean. If you're understanding the principle of delegation well enough to hand things off to agents, you're going to consistently create agents that are effective because they serve a purpose. And then if you're good at writing a prompt of some kind or building a system that can write those prompts for you, you're now going to have that full cycle of I have clean data, specific agents that do specific things that can accomplish specific tasks, and a fluent way of instructing them on how to do that.
Yeah, so that was a good answer for me. Thank you. I think everybody I know struggles. I don't know anyone that's actually solved this yet. So I just want to get your thoughts around like, how do we turn like our AI value proposition in our product to like an invoice that someone's gonna like how do you do that at scale across different companies that are all working differently? For us to be in the AI agent business, instead of selling like a user per license per month, we want to sell a capability that delivers real like business value. I know I'm using a lot of cliches here, but that's the truth. So it's like,
Yep.
I don't think it's a solvable problem, to be honest with you. I think like it almost has to be negotiated case by case. I was wondering what your thoughts were around that.
Yeah, absolutely. This has come up quite a few times, so I've had some time to kind of explore it. I mean, I'll say this, it first kind of came from what's a good billing approach, because especially now that things are going crazy with compute consumption and, you don't want to bite the bullet when somebody uses your software 1,000 times instead of one, and all of a sudden the rack rate of that increases exponentially. And so in exploring that, what we had found from the billing side was what makes something effective as a product is it a particular harness that is pre-programmed with specific business value? So for example, our internal product is not the world's best LLM. It's never going to be that, and I don't want it to be that. What it is really great at is making groups of agents that are specialized around particular business problems. And so a harness, in a nutshell, is kind of the thing that wraps around an LLM. So like that's kind of what I like about GitHub Copilot is as a harness, I can choose whatever model I want, right? If I want to use Claude, if I want to use GPT, Gemini, even the Microsoft AI ones are in here. And that I think is a particularly important value prop. The value from the model, because the model is going to change and the cost of the model is going to change. So you want to keep that as a variable cost because then that cost can be managed by the user. And to be honest, as a user, that's something that I prefer anyways, because I don't want to get a bill from a software that says, oh, it's like 15 times more expensive and I don't have a clear line of sight into why, nor did I consent to extra usage of it, right? Like that's one thing that I really like about GitHub Copilot is even I think today it prompted me, it's telling me I've already used 50% of my budget. If I want to go an additional budget, like I can see very clearly that, if I want to incur more costs with this thing, this is kind of where I can get that information. And so by separating out the harness aspect of it, so the data and the schema and the instructions, the context around the specific task that the agent is doing, but you have complete control over the cost. So I don't know if that necessarily solves it in every situation. I just think that's what I've found is a model that makes sense based off of what's been happening in the market, because that harness and really building something in a way that it's designed that way, one, keeps you from going extinct because as models evolve, the harness will evolve with them. It avoids dealing with the aftermath of variable cost, which on the flip side also provides value to the customer because they can trust that they have full control over how much they spend on said software. And it keeps the software hyper specialized because that harness is purpose built for that subject matter expertise, like elevator mechanic recommendations, which is not something that Claude or ChatGPT or Microsoft is ever going to make something that's that purpose built. So that's kind of how I look at the model changing. I don't know if it solves it in every situation, but that's kind of what we've seen so far with some of the products that we've been looking at. Awesome. Well, that's all I think we wanted to go through in this session. So I appreciate you guys taking the time and having good questions and everything and topics to go through. And if you have anything else that you think of after, just shoot me a message or an email. And I'll get the rest of this out in a recording later on this week.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.